Well, it's the one thing we can all bank on. Death, that is. As my English teacher used to say, your train is coming. It's only a question of when.
Oh,
Despite death being such a sure thing, we often avoid the subject. It's a scary thing, likely the scariest of all, but not for Paul Williams.
see, Paul cares for the grounds at the Oak Hill Cemetery in DC and has unique insight into how to get the most out of your experience if you are thinking of visiting one of the city's graveyards. So, Paul, first of all, thanks for doing this. Thanks for being here.
Sure. Thanks for having me. It's great.
Can you tell us exactly what you do?
I'm the 14th superintendent, they call me, at Oak Hill Cemetery. So I oversee the grounds. I oversee funerals, burials, and then I'm responsible for selling plots as well.
Great. And so, do you live on the grounds?
We do. One of the best perks of the job is my husband and I and two cats get to live in a gatehouse at the cemetery entrance. It's a 5,000 square foot house that was built starting in 1850. It's an amazing property.
Oh, wow.
Wow. Now, I'm not sure if I believe in ghosts yet. I'm still on the fence. But if they do exist, I feel like they're definitely in and around where you are. Do you see any ghosts? Are you aware of any ghosts?
We like to think that because we live amongst 20,000 dead people, that they like to go and haunt somewhere else because they live here too. So we're in that philosophy. But there was rumors decades ago that there was a young female ghost in the house here. And I think her grave had been unmarked. So once it was marked, my predecessors said that they've never had any ghostly apparitions in the house since. So we appeased her. And like I said, they haunt somewhere else, their house where they died or something, not here.
We're making light of this, but this is an industry that is so important and so interesting.
Yes.
Especially in our city. And Paul has long been in it, but formerly the president of Congressional Cemetery for years. Tell us what got you into this and what kind of responsibility do you feel? Because I imagine, there's a lot of care that goes into this job.
It's true. You don't really go to school to run a cemetery. It doesn't exist. So most of us superintendents or presidents fall into it. I happen to have a background in historic preservation. So when I started at Congressional and indeed here, they had a need for someone that knew about preservation of both the architecture here, the chapel, the gatehouse, as well as headstones that might have issues being, 175 years old and fallen over and how to put them back together.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the skills that I brought. And frankly, it's really pretty easy to run a cemetery and bury a person. You dig a hole and you put a casket in it. It's really not rocket science. So that part of the business is pretty easy to learn for anybody.
Yeah. But the preservation, though, is where I imagine, there's science to it.
Right. You're dealing with materials and old materials at that.
Yeah. And a lot of people can very quickly screw that up. If they use a power washer to try to, power wash a marble stone, you're going to take away all of the inscriptions and that stone's going to become dust in 10 years. So cemeterians really need to know what they're doing historic wise. Yeah.
Now, Oak Hill Cemetery is self-described as a, quote, out of doors memory bank. Can you talk at all about, how much memory and history is held within, those buried there, the people that visit them, and just for the city more broadly?
Yeah, it's an interesting site. It only looks to be about 2 blocks long along our street in Georgetown. But in fact, we're 22 acres of rolling landscape back there. So we go all the way down to Rock Creek Park. As I mentioned, we have about 20,000 people buried there. And it really is a living museum of Washington, D.C. Once you start walking around back there, I tell everyone to get lost on purpose. You will see all the names, usually are metro stations now, like the Van Nesses and the Lithicums and the Corcorans and the Renwicks. Everybody that has a name associated with things that we all know in DC, including street names, are all buried here. So it's really a great connection to those of us that have lived in Washington for a long time.
This time of year, do cemeteries really see more visitors just because of the whole Halloween spooky thing? And if that's true, Is that a good thing? Is that like helping kind of raise awareness? Does it help generate funding at all for what you do?
Yeah, I notice a lot more of our visitors are wearing all black lately.
Gee, I wonder why.
But it is a renewed interest in cemeteries this time of year. People think about it. It's always been in Hollywood and movies and stuff that cemeteries are creepy and Halloween and whatnot. So we do have increased visitors, but we encourage that. We'd like to have people come in, wander around. It's literally like a 22-acre central park in the middle of Georgetown. It's full of trees, and we have 8 deer that live in here, and foxes and hawks and bunnies and everything. So it's a really treasure trove of wilderness that just happens to have, a lot of dead people.
An oasis in this like urban area that we're living in. Now, you talked about that you also, sell plots. So it's still an active cemetery, in other words. I wasn't really aware of that, but can you talk about that? People can still be buried here.
Yeah, it is rare for cemeteries as old as we are. We were started in 1849, 175 years ago or so, to still have plots, because old cemeteries tend to fill up, and then you lose your source of revenue, which is a really important part of a cemetery. That's where it all comes from. So my predecessor, and we've gotten really creative about creating new real estate. So we can do something as simple as narrowing a road, and then we can create 20 new casket sites where the road used to be. We do the same thing with a lot of our paths. We just eliminate the path, and then we have grassy areas to do caskets or cremation. So we are an active cemetery. We've probably got maybe 200 casket sites right now, and probably more than 600 cremation sites right now. And it's really limitless what we can create within our limited borders.
Interesting. You mentioned some of the, I love this, some of the like metro stations and the museums being named after those who are buried there. And I kind of want to loop in congressional as well, because you have so much experience there. What are some of your favorite stories, or your favorite story, historical story of someone who was buried in our city? Yeah,
that's a good point. Congressional is a little more quirky. It has a little more infamous people like J. Edgar Hoover.
Right.
And it has a gay corner, which we think is the only gay corner in a cemetery in the world, which is really cool. And it turns out we have a little gay stairs here. It's all cremation. So I was introduced to it by a gay man that owns one, and he said all of our friends are all buried there since the 1980s. So we have a little gay corner here too.
Oh, interesting.
Which is fascinating. And one of my favorite stones here is a cremation site near our chapel, and it's a family. They're buried there, and they have their names and their dates, just like everyone does around the world. But what they also inscribed was, it says, we finally found a place to park in Georgetown.
Oh my gosh.
Wow, a little humor.
Isn't that awesome?
In stone.
Oh my gosh.
I love it. I encourage it, and I love it.
I'm trying to think of it. Can you rattle off some names for us? Because I think you've done that. But who do you think are the most famous people who are buried in DC in the cemeteries?
Definitely. We have Katharine Graham here. So she's a big one. Her house is across the street.
Yeah.
We have Ben Bradley, another journalist from the Washington Post. I had the honor of burying Madeleine Albright just about 2 months ago. So she is now here at Oak Hill Cemetery. That was a big celebrity funeral for us, if you will. At Congressional, they have Matthew Brady. He was the Civil War photographer that took all of those images that we've all seen. He's buried right here in DC. He had a photography studio right down on Pennsylvania Avenue. And then one of my favorites at Congressional is Mary Hall. And she was a single businesswoman that had a house near the Capitol building. And she left an estate as a single woman worth $1 million in 1882.
Wow.
And her clients were very prominent congressmen at that time. And she ran a really high-class bordello near the Capitol building.
That is
wow.
I kind of saw where that was going.
Right.
That's how you make a lot of money.
That's right. Yeah, that was a lot of money.
That's interesting.
And a lot of clients close by.
Wow. Well, and it's so striking that, in hearing you describe these cemeteries, your work, and you yourself, it's like it's all so lively, but it all circulates around burial and death. So what is it like kind of being in that, middle ground between those two?
What you did there with middle ground. Uh,
Luke was a philosophy major, so I was expecting some kind of
I'm just
life or death question, and sure enough, he delivered.
right, you're killing me. We can go on for hours. With
I know. I was
these
going to say you
right?
probably have a lot of those one-liners.
It is an interesting. We consider ourselves kind of a service industry. We're not morticians or a funeral home, and we don't do embalming and cremation and stuff like that. So we're the easiest part of a burial or a funeral situation. So we're the end. We, open a hole. We have a service in the chapel, but we still deal with grieving families, grieving individuals. A lot of it, it's one or the other. A lot of people are torn with their grief and suffering, and it's an awful process. On the other hand, when I tour around people that are still alive, planning their own plots or demise, we make it as fun as possible. We joke about it. We pick out sites. We pick out the view. They lay down on the site and look up to see their view.
Oh my goodness.
Really?
Right, it happens. And I tell them it's really important because they get exactly what they want. So if someone were to suddenly die and their children never knew what mother's favorite tree was, well, mom's figured that out and she knows exactly where she wants to go. So I encourage the pre-planning rather than at time of need, we call it in the industry. When there's a death on a Monday and a casket needs to be in the ground on Thursday, and people have to come up with tens of thousands of dollars in days, it just adds to the stress and emotions of the funeral.
Wow.
Yeah, that's good advice.
So, yeah.
We had somebody in our newsroom say, oh, you should ask him. I mean, as far as the grieving goes, a lot of times people will leave things behind on grave sites or on the plot that maybe is significant to them or significant to that person, but it can't stay there forever, right? So what happens to that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I offer the advice to put that kind of stuff either in a cremation niche or in a casket so that it stays with the site. It could be military medals. It could be your favorite houseplant. It could be your cat's cremated remains from 10 years ago.
Oh my gosh.
It could really be anything. I just did a cremation funeral last week, and they asked if they could put a full bottle of Stoli vodka in the cremation site because that was their dad's favorite vodka. And I said, hell yeah, why not? So in went dad in a vase, and in went a full bottle of vodka, and
my gosh,
call it a day. Why not? There's no protocol or traditions that need to be followed. You can really customize it and make it your own emotional event.
But Paul, if I left a bottle of Stoli, on a random Thursday when I was visiting my father's grave, hopefully that doesn't happen anytime soon, by the way, Dad, if you're listening. What happens to that? I mean, you guys eventually kind of have to clear the area, right? And keep it clean.
Yeah. The gates close at 4:30, so the Stoli would end up in our liquor cabinet.
Oh my God. Honesty.
I love it.
Oh my gosh.
And I only say that because if that were the case, I could have a 13-year-old come in here and find a bottle of vodka and start
100%.
drinking. But traditionally what we do is we let whatever items are there as long as can be until they become unsightly. So if it's like a little stuffed animal, 6 weeks from now in rain and snow, it's going to become unsightly. So we kind of move it away from that. Yeah.
I'm going to let that chime kind of go. I think the last question I have is we kind of mentioned the holiday and how there's more traffic around Halloween. Are there events going on at your cemetery, at others that people could maybe take part in that maybe not like, spooky necessarily, but maybe from a historical perspective?
Sure. We have now over here, we have 2 dog days a year. So you can bring in your dog and you can roam the 22 acres with your dog off leash. So
that's fun.
Yeah, it's really fun. These city dogs that are cooped up in, small parks or a small backyard can run 22 acres, and they do. It's awesome. So we do that twice a year. And then we have a lot of tour guides that come in with tours. We have a self-guided tour that people can do in our cemetery here. We're happy to tour people around, but I'm most excited to kind of bring Oak Hill up to the 21st century in digitizing the cemetery. So soon you'll be able to come in with your cell phone and type in tours that lead you right to that great site of all the famous people or a relative. Even if a site is unmarked, we'll be able to guide people right to that site.
It's almost like perfect for VR, like to kind of go on a tour and like learn
Whoa.
the history of someone who's buried there.
Yeah, there's a lot of potential.
Oh yeah. We have a lot of visitors that come in, as I said, just get lost on purpose, and they'll start Googling names. They'll see a really weird name or an inscription that says, Major General in the Civil War. And they're like, I wonder who he is. And
Yeah.
so it's all out there, and it just brings you right back to where that individual is. It's pretty cool.
Well, Paul Williams, thank you so much for bringing us into this world of Oak Hill Cemetery. We appreciate it.
Sure. I appreciate the interest, and by all means, encourage everyone to come by and stop. It's a beautiful, beautiful site.